Hi! In the previous lecture, we introduced the concept of corporate identity, corporate branding, and corporate design, and we define the elements that, through the prism of Kapferer, can help us to identify the main characteristic of a brand. The aim of this lecture, instead, is to introduce the concept of corporate design and the elements necessary to be able to build it, the feature of visual communication. In this lecture, you will discover the main graphic tools, colors, typography, pictures, symbols, and layout, and how they could be used to create a strong visual identity. Corporate design is the first tool through which the brand comes into contact with the market and the consumer through visual communication tools. But how can we define visual communication? Bruno Munari, the Italian designer, artist, theorist and lecturer, in his book Design e comunicazione visiva, contributo a una metodologia didattica, published the first time in 1968, helps us to define it. Visual communication, argued Munari, is an irreplaceable means of passing information from a sender to a receiver, through the objectivity of the signals and the absence of false interpretation. Visual communication is like a language made up only of images, signs, symbols that could have the same meaning for people of different nations and therefore of different languages. Visual communication is a language, perhaps more limited than the spoken one, but certainly more direct. Therefore, visual communication can be defined as a creation or the selection of different elements, such as colors, signs, and symbols and font, on a surface, a page or a screen, to transmit a message from a sender, which in our case could be a brand, to a receiver, which in our case could be a possible customer. The color represents the first element, the most immediate and direct one. As stated by the artist Wassily Kandinsky, color is a mean to exert a direct influence on the soul. Color is the keyboard, the eye is a hammer, the soul is the piano with its many strings. Precisely, for their nature, color assume firstly, for the graphic designer and then for a brand, a crucial element for defining an immediately recognizable visual identity. Like the red for the Ferrari, the colors of Swedish flag for IKEA, the brown for UPS, the magenta for Deutsche Telekom. Signs and symbols are the essential element of a drawing, which define the object and style of the representation. They represent a visual synthesis of a concept or an object. The graphic characteristics of the signs contribute to creating the visual identity of a symbol, more synthetic if a representation is defined through the subtraction of details, more pictorial and precise if the image is described with more accuracy. The third element of visual communication are fonts, which represent a set of graphic signs used to generate the typography identity of a mark. The font can be classified into four main groups based on their design and style: serif, sans serif, script and decorative styles. Today, we have various systems to organize in a more precise way the multitude of existing typefaces. The most consolidated text styles are serif type style, such as Old Style, Transitional, Neoclassical and Didone, Slab, Clarendon, Glyphic, sans serif type as grotesque, square, humanistic and geometric, script type style such as formal, casual, calligraphic, black letter and Lombard, and decorative like grunge, psychedelic and graffiti. Another fundamental vehicle of information and feeling are images. Both as photograph and illustration, they are more accurate than symbols and could communicate a large number of information. Finally, we need the graphic space. It represents the area in which the visual elements, typography, sign and symbols, images and color, are inserted according to a precise rhythm and order. How we use the space allows not only a correct reading of the information, but also an immediate recognition of the different visual communication tools used by a brand, such as catalogs, packaging, shopping bags, website, etc. Visual communication, therefore, represents a fundamental element for the construction of true brand identity and to identify and promote a product, a place, or a service, to inform on news and activities, and, not least, to decorate. A logo is the first activity to consider to start building a visual identity. Paul Rand is one of the most famous graphic designers who, with his work, has characterized the graphical identity of USA in the second half of the last century. He argued that a logo is less important than the product it signifies. What it means is more important than what it looks like. We need to consider, in fact, that a trademark does not sell directly, it identifies. And, last but not least, a logo derives its meanings from the quality of the products to which it is associated, not the opposite. Moreover, forms and typography must be appropriate from the stylistic and chromatic point of view according to the type of personality of the company and the style of the products offered. A logo like the one of Toys R Us, from this point of view, is appropriate, correctly using playful, childish fonts, bright color and playful composition of letters. Another important feature in defining the design of a logo is its ability not to bind excessively to graphic trend. It is better to create a logo as timeless as possible so that it can be used over the long term, thus making its use constant, to create a stronger link between the visual identity of the brand and consumers. A logo needs precise rules that can allow its correct application. An effective logo should be simple, appropriate, timeless, and easy to remember. To sum up, during this lecture we defined the concept of visual communication, and we analyzed all the main elements that contribute to define the concept of corporate design.